I watched my daughter drive away, and I smiled. Not because I was brave, not because I wasn't terrified. I smiled because 6 weeks ago, I had made a phone call that changed everything, and my daughter had no idea. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Margaret. I am 67 years old. I taught elementary school for 31 years in Columbus, Ohio. And when I retired, I had a modest savings account, a paid-off house on Clover Street that my late husband Gerald and I had bought together in 1989, and one daughter I would have walked through fire for. Her name is Diane. Gerald passed 8 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 14 weeks from diagnosis to the day I held his hand for the last time. After he was gone, it was just Diane and me, and for a while, that felt like enough. Diane married a man named Robert when she was 31. Robert sold commercial real estate and had the kind of smile that made you feel slightly off balance, too wide, too ready. I never said anything. Diane loved him. I loved Diane. So I kept my thoughts about Robert's smile to myself, and I brought a casserole to their housewarming, and I sat at the front of the church at their wedding, and I cried the way mothers cry when they watch their child choose someone for life. They had one son. His name is Tyler. He was 9 years old at the time all of this happened, and I want you to keep him in mind, because he matters more than anything else in this story. For the first few years of their marriage, things seemed fine. Robert's business was doing well, or so he said. They bought a house in a suburb called Westfield, about 40 minutes from me. I drove out every Sunday for dinner. I babysat Tyler on school breaks. I was, as far as I knew, a good mother and a good grandmother, and I was grateful for every minute of it. Then Gerald's life insurance came through. A year after he died, I had delayed dealing with it because grief does that. It makes paperwork feel impossible, and suddenly I had $240,000 sitting in an account. I didn't tell many people. I paid off a small remaining balance on the house. I set aside money for Tyler's college fund directly into an account in his name, and I put the rest into a CD at my bank. I told Diane about it because she was my daughter. Because you tell your daughter things. That was my first mistake. Within a month, Robert started coming to Sunday dinners more often, which he had never done before. He started asking questions about my retirement, whether I had a financial advisor, whether I'd thought about diversifying, whether I'd considered that the housing market in Columbus was really moving and that sitting on a paid-off house was actually a form of losing money in a market like this one. I smiled, and I passed the rolls, and I said I'd think about it. Then Diane started calling me more often. Not to talk about Tyler or about her week or about the book club she used to love. She called to talk about money, about how she and Robert were stretched thin, about how Robert had a sure thing, a commercial property deal that just needed a small injection of capital to get off the ground, about how $75,000 could become $200,000 within 18 months. Guaranteed. I said I'd think about it. I did think about it. I thought about it alone in my kitchen at night with a cup of chamomile tea and Gerald's old cardigan around my shoulders, and what I thought was, something is wrong. I called my friend Patricia. Patricia had been my closest friend since we taught 3rd grade together, starting in 1987. She was 70 now, sharp as broken glass, and her son-in-law was a family attorney named David Chen. I told Patricia everything over the phone one Thursday evening, and she was quiet for a long moment. "Maggie," she said, "let me have David call you." David called me the next morning. I told him what I'd been noticing: the increased attention, the financial questions, the pressure about the investment. He listened carefully. Then he asked me something that stopped me cold. "Margaret, do you have a power of attorney document in place?" I did. I had signed one 3 years ago when I had a minor cardiac procedure, nothing serious, just an ablation for an irregular heartbeat, and I had named Diane as my power of attorney for healthcare and financial decisions in the event I was incapacitated. It had seemed like the loving, practical thing to do at the time. "I need you to come into my office," David said. "Tomorrow, if you can." I went the next morning. David explained what a durable power of attorney meant, what it allowed, what it could be used for. He explained that if someone were motivated to do so, they could use that document to access accounts, to make financial decisions, even to sell property, and that proving abuse of that authority after the fact was a long and painful legal process. "I'm not saying that's what's happening," he said carefully. "I'm saying let's make sure it can't happen." We spent 2 hours in his office that day. I revoked the existing power of attorney and signed a new one, naming Patricia as my agent. I moved the bulk of my savings into a new account that required two-party authorization for any withdrawal over $500. David sent a certified letter to my bank. He also helped me update my will, which had not been touched since Gerald died. I went home feeling like I had been holding my breath underwater for weeks and had finally broken the surface. I did not tell Diane any of this. 2 weeks later, she called and asked if she could come over for dinner. "Just the two of us," she said. She had something she wanted to talk to me about. My stomach tightened, but I said yes. "Of course, come over. I'll make the chicken piccata you like." She arrived on a Wednesday evening, looking lovely and tired, in the way young mothers look tired, stretched thin at the edges, but still bright underneath. She hugged me at the door, and I held her for a second longer than usual because she was still my daughter, and I still loved her, and some part of me was praying I was wrong about everything. We ate dinner and talked about Tyler and about her friend from college who had just gotten divorced and about nothing at all for 40 minutes. Then she set down her fork and looked at me with an expression I recognized I had seen it on the faces of children in my classroom for 31 years. The expression of someone about to say something they have been rehearsing. "Mom," she said, "Robert and I need your help." She told me the investment deal had a deadline, that if they didn't get the capital in by the end of the month, they'd lose the opportunity entirely, that they'd already put in their own savings. She named a figure that I later learned was fabricated and that they just needed a bridge. She said the word bridge 4 times. A bridge, just to get to the other side. $80,000. I looked at my daughter across the table. I thought about Gerald, about the years we spent saving, about the summers we didn't take vacations so that we could put more away for exactly this kind of security in old age. I thought about Tyler, 9 years old, with his father's wide, ready smile, but his mother's eyes, Gerald's eyes, actually hazel and a little searching. I told Diane I would think about it. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Mom. I knew you'd understand." After she left, I called David. Here's what I did not know until David told me the following week. Robert had a second mortgage on their house that Diane may or may not have known about. He had 2 prior civil judgments against him from failed business deals in 2018 and 2020. The commercial property deal he had described to Diane and that Diane had described to me did not appear to exist in any county property record David's paralegal could locate. "Margaret," David said, "I don't want to tell you what to do, but I want you to know what you're dealing with." I already knew. I think I had known for a while. The knowing had just been sitting in my chest, like a stone I couldn't put down. I called Diane and told her I had decided to help. I said I wanted to do it right, legally, cleanly, and that I'd like to meet with her and Robert together at my house on Saturday morning. I said I had the money ready. They arrived at 10 o'clock on Saturday. Robert was wearing a sport coat. He shook my hand with both of his and called me Margaret, in the way people call you by your name when they want something from you. Diane hugged me and whispered "thank you" against my cheek. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. I had a folder in front of me. Inside the folder was a document David had prepared, a formal loan agreement, with terms, a repayment schedule, a notarization requirement, and a clause specifying that the loan was secured against their property. Standard and legal and fair. Robert's smile flickered, just for a moment, like a light with a loose connection. "I thought we were talking about a gift," he said. "A loan is better for taxes," I said pleasantly, "and it protects all of us." Diane looked at Robert. Robert looked at me. He said he'd need to have his own attorney look at it before signing. I said, "Of course. Take all the time you need." I slid the folder across the table. He never called David's office. Diane stopped returning my calls as promptly. Sunday dinners became every other Sunday, then once a month. For 3 months, things were quiet in the way that isn't actually quiet. It's the silence of something building pressure behind a wall. Then came the Thursday that changed everything. I was in my backyard pulling up the last of the summer tomato plants when my neighbor Frank came to the fence and asked, with an apologetic look on his face, whether I was planning on selling the house. I put down my trowel. "What?" I said. He showed me on his phone. There was a listing on a real estate site. My house, my address, photographs taken from the street, an asking price of $310,000. The listing agent was a firm I'd never heard of. The contact name was Robert. I stood in my backyard with dirt on my hands for what felt like a very long time. Then I went inside and I called David. What Robert had done, or attempted to do, was create a fraudulent listing using a forged version of my signature on a sales authorization form. David's paralegal confirmed it within an hour. The notary stamp on the document was from a notary who, when contacted, said he had never met anyone named Margaret Halcott and had certainly never notarized any document for her. David said, "I need you to let me handle this. Don't call Diane yet. Don't call Robert. Let me make some calls." I said, "Make them." I went to bed that night and I lay in the dark in the house Gerald and I had painted together, in the room where we had woken up next to each other for 26 years. And I thought about my daughter. I thought about whether she had known. I thought about what it would mean if she had, and what it would mean if she hadn't. I thought about Tyler asleep in his bed in Westfield, 9 years old, with no idea what his father was doing. I thought about all of it for a long time, and then I made a decision. In the morning I called Patricia. "I need you to be ready," I told her. "It's going to happen soon." She said, "I've been ready since the first phone call, Maggie. You know that." David moved quickly. He filed a report with the Columbus Police Fraud Division and provided them with the forged document, the false notarization, Robert's name, and a timeline. A detective named Harris called me the following Tuesday and asked me to come in and give a formal statement, which I did. He was professional and thorough, and he told me that what I was describing constituted real estate fraud and potentially elder financial abuse under Ohio statute, both of which were felonies. I gave my statement. I signed where they asked me to sign. I drove home, and I sat in the kitchen, and I ate a bowl of soup, and I waited. 2 weeks later, Diane called me. She asked if she could come over. I said yes. She arrived alone, without Robert, which surprised me. She sat down at the same kitchen table, and she looked at me for a moment without saying anything, and I saw something in her face that I hadn't seen in a long time. She looked like herself. She looked like the girl who used to bring me drawings of horses and ask me to tape them to the refrigerator. "Mom," she said, "I need to tell you something." She told me she hadn't known about the listing. She told me she had found out 3 days ago when Robert's business partner, a man she'd never trusted, called their house looking for Robert and said something in passing about the Columbus property deal falling through. She had gone through Robert's home office that night after he fell asleep. She had found the forged documents. She had found other things too, loan agreements in her name she had never signed, a credit card account she didn't know existed, correspondence with a woman in Phoenix. She was shaking by the time she finished talking. I reached across the table and I took her hand. "I know," I said quietly. "I've known for a while, and I've already dealt with it." I told her about David, about the revoked power of attorney, about the protected accounts, about the police report. I watched her face move through about 15 different expressions in the space of 2 minutes. Shock, then relief, then horror, then something that looked like shame. "I should have seen it sooner," she said. "Sometimes we can't see clearly what we love," I said. "That's not a failure. That's just being human." She put her face in her hands and cried for a long time. I sat with her. When she looked up, she said, "What happens now?" What happened was this. Robert was arrested on a Wednesday morning. Detective Harris called to tell me 2 counts of real estate fraud, 1 count of elder financial abuse, 1 count of forgery. He was taken into custody at his office, in front of his colleagues, in the middle of a meeting. I have thought about that moment many times, and I have never once felt bad about it. He was arraigned 2 days later. Diane had already separated from him by then. She had taken Tyler and gone to stay with her college roommate across town, and she had called a family attorney of her own, a woman named Susan Kravitz, who David spoke highly of. The case took several months to work through the system. Robert's attorney tried various strategies, argued the document was a miscommunication, argued I had verbally authorized the listing, argued a great many things that the forged notarization stamp made very difficult to sustain. In the end, Robert accepted a plea agreement. 30 months in a minimum security facility, mandatory restitution, permanent prohibition from working in real estate or financial services in Ohio. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, looked at Robert before sentencing and said words I will remember for the rest of my life. She said, You targeted someone who trusted you specifically because she trusted you, and you disguised your actions as care. That is not a gray area. That is predatory. I was sitting in the third row. Patricia was next to me. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Diane sat one row behind us with Tyler beside her. He was wearing a button-down shirt, and he didn't fully understand what was happening. Diane had told him his father had made some serious mistakes and that there were going to be changes, but he was old enough to feel the weight of it. When we walked out of the courthouse, he came up beside me and slipped his hand into mine without saying anything. We walked to the parking lot like that, his hand in my hand, and I had to stop for a moment and look up at the sky to keep from crying in a way I didn't want him to see. In the weeks after sentencing, Diane and I had long conversations, hard ones. She asked me why I hadn't told her sooner what I suspected, and I told her honestly, because I wasn't sure what she knew, and because I loved her, and because I was afraid of what would happen to our relationship if I was wrong. She said she understood, though I could see she was still working through it. We are both still working through it, in our different ways. She asked me once, late on a Sunday evening when Tyler was asleep in my spare bedroom, they stayed with me often in those months, whether I was angry at her. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I was scared, I said. For a long time, I was more scared than angry. Scared that I'd misjudged you. Scared that the person I thought you were wasn't real. She looked at the table. But you are real, I said. That's why we're sitting here. She looked up. Her eyes were wet. She nodded, just once. I want to say something about Tyler, because I think it matters. He is 9 years old and his father is in prison, and his world tilted on its axis without warning. He has been in therapy since the fall. Diane arranged it immediately, which told me a great deal about who she actually is when she is not under Robert's influence. He has good weeks and hard weeks. He draws pictures of superheroes and leaves them on my kitchen counter. He asked me once, while we were making pancakes on a Saturday morning, whether his dad was a bad person. I thought about that question for a moment, because he deserved a real answer and not a comfortable one. I think your dad made choices that hurt people, I said, and those choices have consequences. But you are not those choices. You are your own person, and you are a very good one. He was quiet, stirring the batter. Grandma, he said, did you know what was going to happen? I looked at him. I knew enough to be careful, I said. He seemed to think about this. Then he said, that was smart. I laughed a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep. Thank you, I said. Your grandfather would have said the same thing. He looked up. Tell me about Grandpa Gerald. So I told him. I told him about the house on Clover Street and the summer we painted it together and got more paint on each other than on the walls. I told him about how Gerald used to drive 40 minutes each way to get the specific brand of coffee he liked. I told him that his grandfather was the most quietly stubborn person I had ever loved, and that stubbornness, in the right direction, is just another word for faithfulness. Tyler listened with the full attention of a child who is trying to construct a picture of a person he never got to meet. I still live in the house on Clover Street. It is still mine. The listing Robert tried to create disappeared within 48 hours of David's intervention, and my title is clear and recorded and untouched. The tomato plants came back this summer, better than last year. Patricia comes over on Thursday evenings, and we drink wine on the back porch, and sometimes we don't talk about any of it, and that silence is the best kind, the kind that doesn't have anything hiding in it. Diane is renting a small apartment about 15 minutes from me. She has gone back to work. She had been out of the workforce for 6 years. And re-entering it was humbling, she said. But she is doing it. She and Tyler come for Sunday dinners, and I make too much food on purpose, and Tyler always eats more than seems physically possible for a child his size. She and I are not the same as we were before. I don't know if that's entirely a bad thing. What we were before had some cracks in it that neither of us had looked at closely enough. What we are now is something we are building on purpose, with our eyes open, and that feels more real to me than the version that existed when I was still pretending not to notice Robert's smile. People ask me sometimes, friends, my doctor, a woman at my church who heard a version of the story through the neighborhood, whether I'm bitter, whether I feel robbed of something, whether I think about what might have happened if I hadn't made that phone call to Patricia, if I hadn't gone to David's office, if I had just handed Robert the $80,000 and trusted in the goodness of family. I tell them the truth. I think about it. I think about the version of this story where I didn't call, where I gave Robert the money and it disappeared into whatever hole it was always going to disappear into, where he came back for more, and I gave more. Because what else do you do when your daughter is standing in your kitchen looking at you with her father's eyes? Where eventually the house went, too, somehow, through some mechanism I wouldn't have understood until it was already done. Where I found myself at 67 with nothing left of what Gerald and I had spent a lifetime building, and a daughter who had watched it happen and would have had to live with that. I think about that version. And then I think about Tyler at my kitchen counter, drawing superheroes and leaving them for me to find. I think about Diane saying, quietly, "I should have seen it sooner," and me saying back, "Sometimes we can't see clearly what we love," and meaning it about her and knowing, in the private part of my heart, that I had once meant it about her too. I am 67 years old. I taught children for 31 years to be careful with the things that mattered, to not let the fear of a hard conversation become the reason the hard thing was never said. I am not always good at following my own lessons, but I am getting better. Gerald used to say, "The patient ones don't win by fighting. They win by still being there when the smoke clears." The smoke has cleared. I am still here. And on Sunday evenings, when the table is full and Tyler is on his third helping and Diane is laughing at something Patricia said, that real laugh, the one I hadn't heard in years, the one that sounds like her. I sit at the head of the table in my own house and I think, I built this. Gerald and I built this together, and then I protected it. And now it is full of the right people, and that is enough. That is more than enough. It is everything.